I actually want to start. Um, Sometimes I get real life stories that are applicable to things that we're talking about. So I like to share them with you guys just to help um, let you know that sometimes what we talk about isn't always, fluff. Sometimes what we talk about is real life. So we've talked several times in this class already that we're in a seller's market big time. And sellers have the upper hand right now. Remember, we talked about supply and demand in that seller's market and why we're in a seller's market. Um, Bottom line, why are we in a seller's market? Because inventory is low and demand is high. Demand is high is because interest rates are historically low right now. So buyers are wanting to take advantage of 2 point something, 3 point something percent interest rates. But the problem is there's very little inventory. There's very little for them to choose from. My team put a home on the market in Greensboro on Friday morning. And we put a best and final offer Sunday, I think Sunday at noon. So we gave, try to give 2.5 days just to give as many buyers the chance that we can see it. And you think about, the more buyers that can see the home, the better that is for my seller, because they can, if you just take the first offer, that is the second one better than the first one, is the third one better. You guys know what I'm saying? So the more buyers we can get in the door to give the opportunity to present an offer, the better this is for my sellers in some cases, because we could get them the best offer. So we were on the market for about 2.5 days. We put it on Friday morning and we cut it off Sunday afternoon. In that time, we had 70 some showings, 73 showings, 2.5 days. And ultimately we got 45 offers on that one little house in Greensboro. Could you imagine being sellers in this market? Has anybody sold a home in this market and you've been the seller of a multiple offer situation? Was that a little overwhelming? Could you imagine being a seller and getting 45 offers? Yes. And if you just came on, make sure I know you're here. So we can count you for attendance. Thank you. When in doubt, just send me a message anyway. So yeah, these sellers, and of course, some were better than others. Some offers were better than others. But it was just a reminder, the sellers didn't go with the most expensive purchase price. There's a lot more for sellers to take into consideration than how much. When we get into unit 10, we're going to talk more about some terms of the offers. And the things that the seller should look at. So that's the market that we're in right now. 45 offers over 2.5 days. I mean, that's just the poor listing agent. I'm so glad Julie's name wasn't on that sign. So the poor listing agent was dealing with all that. And of course we got our sellers under, and our sellers are just like, wow. And we even got a backup offer. Backup contract. Well, again, we'll talk about backups when we get to unit 10. So this is real. This stuff that we talk about is real. Guys, I'm not going to say every single thing that we talk about in pre-licensing you're going to use in a day-to-day basis. I'm not naive. I know this. Unit 5 is our attorney's unit. Unit 5 is teaching us just enough to be dangerous. Appraisal unit, financing units, right? So some of this, we're just kind of getting an understanding for how the big picture works for the overall view. But a lot of this is really relevant and a sign of the times, if you will. So inventory, it started creeping back up before Thanksgiving, around October, November, that kind of thing. But then when the holidays hit, things slow down, which is very common. It's not uncommon at all to see real estate slow down around the holidays. So I think once we get into February, maybe even into March, hopefully we can see inventory start coming back up a little bit and give buyers a chance. Because if you think about it, 45 offers, that means 44 got a rejection, right? Only one can win. So that's what we talked about yesterday in our meeting, was that phenomenon. Let's see, Christina. Yeah, and the house didn't appraise. That's a great point, Christina. And we'll talk about that when we get to unit 17. because if buyers are offering more than the asking price, which is what's happening right now, buyers go into it understanding that the property probably won't appraise, meaning the buyers are going to have to come out of pocket for that difference. So as buyers agents, that's one thing that we can help do to educate our buyers. You know, you're going to have to, you know, to be competitive with 44 other offers, you're going to have to stand apart somehow, and you're probably going to have to offer more, and understanding that the home's not going to appraise for that. So that's, again, it's all about helping to educate the public. And, you know, this is the market that we're in right now. It's not easy being a buyer right now. I know I just asked if anybody sold a house recently. Has anybody tried or successfully bought a house recently? A couple of you, was it easy? You know, it's not easy being a buyer right now, and nobody ever said it was. But bottom line is, if you want to buy a house in this market, this is what you're facing, because the market is what it is. So what? The seller backed out? Oh, the buyer backed out. Okay. Okay. So when we get into unit 10, we'll talk about you know, we'll talk specifics about the contract and things that buyers and sellers should consider, the terms of the offer. Yeah, VA loans don't really look good. FHA loans don't really look good to sellers right now. We'll talk about that, the different loan types, when we get to unit 14. So again, you may not be using this stuff every day in your real estate career, but understanding how all this works, because it's all working gears, right? The lender does their thing, we do our thing, the attorney does their thing, and we're all working gears. And to keep this transaction moving, we all have to keep those gears working. So that's my little story. Let's see. We are going to get started. We're going to get started with some math. So if you guys don't have your calculators, go ahead and grab that. And while I'm getting myself set up, I want all of you, every single one of you, I want to hear from everybody. Tell me in the chat, private chat, how many square feet are in 1 acre? Every single one of you. And if you don't know, say, Julie, I'm sorry, I don't know. You're getting ready to find out. How many square feet are in 1 acre? And this is the math that we're getting ready to get into. It's a start. We're going to have this number embedded in your brain if it's not. If it is, great. If it's not, we'll get it. And like we said the other day, again, this is a very real life application. This is a number that we use every single day. Okay, so it looks like most of us have it. So how many square feet are in 1 acre? There are 43,560 square feet in 1 acre. If you don't know that number, write it down. If you do know that number, write it down again. And this is part of the math that we're going to do today. And part of what we're going to learn how to do is to go from square feet to acres, is to convert how many square feet, when you know the square feet, to convert to acres, when you know the acres, to convert to square feet. So we're going to do, when you're going from acres to square feet, the rule is that you multiply. And of course, we're getting ready to look at examples in just a second. So the rule is when you're going from square feet to acres, you're going to multiply. When you're going from square feet, when you go to acres to square feet, you multiply. When you go from square feet to acres, you divide. Where are my T-bar fans? Have I converted anybody yet? Y'all want some good news? Y'all want to know what I did? I figured out how to make this happen using the T-bar. I tweaked it just a little bit, just a little tweak. And I figured out how we can do this kind of math using the T-bar. So on the bottom right, instead of using the rate or percent, we're going to use our magic number of 43,560. So that's the tweak. Instead of rate or percent, we're going to use 43,560. The number that goes on top is square feet. The number that goes in the bottom right is acres. So again, you guys have choices. And this is the beauty of math. This is why I like math so much. Everybody's brain sees it differently. And remember, I don't care how your brain sees it. Just see it. Just hopefully see it. So either you know when you're going from acres to square feet, you multiply. When you're going from square feet to acres, you divide. Or you can rely on the T-bar. Makes no difference to me. So if you guys have this jotted down where you can reference it, we've got a couple examples we're going to put up and kind of work through together. Okay, so let's see. Tell me in a private chat how many acres are in 21,780 square feet. How many acres are in 21,780 square feet? So when you see this, 21,780, one thing we can do with these types of problems is before we do anything, we just can kind of stop and think it through. Good morning. We can just kind of stop and think it through. So we all know now that there are 43,560 square feet in 1 acre. Yes, 1 acre contains 43,560. So if this lot has 21,780, show me by thumbs up or thumbs down. Is this lot more than or less than 1 acre? Is it more than or less than? That's right. It's less than, right? Because 1 acre has 43,560. So if you just kind of just stop for a second and look at that number, if you have an answer choice that is more than 1 acre, you can go ahead and rule that out, right? Because you know this number is less than 43,560. Okay. So this is one that we can stop, just, stop and think, stop and look at your number. So we are solving for acres. And remember, when I do math, I always like to start with where I want to end. So my acres is my X, that's my unknown variable. My magic number in the bottom right is 43,560. And my square feet goes on top, 21,780. On your calculator, take 21,780, divide 43,560, and we get half an acre. If you want to do the math, then again, 21,780 divided by 43,560 gives you half an acre. Questions so far? All right, let's look at another one. Tell me in a private chat how many square feet are in 4 acres. Okay. So 4 acres means that my answer is going to be more than 43,560, right? Because 4 acres is more than 1. 1 acre is 43,560. So again, just stopping and thinking that through. And again, you might be able, guys, like we talked about, anytime you can eliminate an answer choice before you start, right? That gives you a better chance. Even if you have to guess, that gives you a better chance of guessing right. So sometimes just studying the answers before you start and seeing if they're reasonable can help you eliminate and increase your chances. So this time the X that I'm solving for is on top. My square feet's on top. The magic number of 43,560 goes in the bottom right. And then I know I have 4 acres. On the T-bar, my up-down line means multiply. So I take 4 times 43,560, and I get 174,240 square feet. So how many square feet are in this lot? 174,240. Am I recording? Yes, okay. I guess they're paranoid about that. Questions so far? Everybody good so far? We're going to take this and expand on it, of course. Just kind of getting you started. We're not on a page. We're just in unit 4 math. We're in unit 4 math. Remember, we skipped that last time because I didn't want to do 2 maths in one day. Okay. If they ever ask you for acres, it's going to be way too easy to give you square feet. So if they ask you for acres, they're going to give you the information that you need to find the square feet. We're getting ready to get into some multi-step problems, which means we need multiple formulas, multiple information. So there's some formulas that we need to know to solve for square feet. And anytime you're looking at a square or a rectangle, we can take length times width. Length times width will give us square feet. And I'll talk about triangle in just a second. Let's pretend, for example, that we are measuring a kitchen. Let's pretend that we want the square feet of a kitchen or a living room or a room in the house. We're going to talk all about measuring in unit 8, the rules and the guidelines and everything. So just don't worry about that right now. Let's just focus on the math. And then we'll talk about measuring guidelines when we get to unit 8. So we're measuring a kitchen, and it's a pretty basic kitchen. And let's just say we measure it and we get a length of 12 feet and a width of 14 feet. So how many square feet are in this kitchen? Well, if we take 12 by 14, I get total square feet of this kitchen of 168. Okay, length times width gives us square feet. In addition to measuring kitchens and rooms in a home, we may also have the opportunity to measure land. And it's the same formula, but the verbiage is different. So in land, you may not hear it referred to as length. You may refer to it as front foot. Front foot is the part of the land that runs parallel to the road. And we'll look at a picture in just a second. So when you're looking at land, the length is known as the front foot and the width is known as the depth. How deep is the lot? How far back does it go? So if we draw one of my fantastic pictures, and you're looking at a land, and here's the road. The length, or I'm sorry, the front foot is the length. The front foot is what runs parallel to the road. Whatever runs along the road is our front foot. The depth is how deep it goes. How far back from the road does it go? So the depth is from the road back. Same formula, just different verbiage. Right? We're all searching for square feet. It's just in how we say it. So length is front foot. Length and front foot are always going to be the first dimension given. Width could also be known as depth. You have the recording. So you can go back, yes, Lily, and watch that at your own pace. I think that would be more helpful for you. And if you need the YouTube channel, remind me at chat. I'll put it back in the chat at break. Okay. So again, you need to know the dimensions of this lot, for example. So we're told that the front feet is 250. The depth is, I don't know, 75. I'm just making stuff up as I go. So 250 times 75 tells me that this lot has 18,750 square feet. Okay, length times width equals square feet. And this is how we can measure squares and rectangles. Another shape that we see sometimes is a triangle. And for our purposes, can we all agree that a triangle is half a square? Does everybody see that? Don't get into obtuse triangles or any of that other stuff. Just keep it simple. A triangle is half of a square. So if you know length times width gives you the square feet of a square divided by 2, you're going to get a triangle. So everybody see the visual? So the formula to find a triangle is length times width, and then just chop it in 2, divide it by 2 to get half. So the front foot is the part that runs along the road. Length or front foot times width or depth gives us square feet. And we've learned how to convert square feet to acres, acres to square feet. Any questions so far? We'll see in just a second about what we're going to do with that triangle. Okay. So let me put this up for you guys. Let me give you guys just a few minutes. Once you kind of think about and study this picture, and in a private chat, tell me what's the front foot, what's the square feet, and how many acres. Give about 30 more seconds. Then we'll talk about it. Okay, so first the problem wants us to find the front foot. The front foot is the area that runs parallel to the road. So in this case, our front feet is 150 front feet. What runs along the road? 150 feet. So the front foot is 150 feet, also known as the length. Use it interchangeably. Then we're asked to find the square feet. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I'm going to go back for 1 second. Julie, that's so mean. Our length times width equals square feet. Guess what, guys? We can use the T-bar on this too. And the problem you guys just did, length times width will get you there. I think where the T-bar is beneficial for this is when it gives you the square feet and it asks you for the length or the width. Because if it gives you the square feet and asks you for the length, we have to divide. And the T-bar helps us decide what to divide. Sorry about that. So we either have the formula length times width equals square feet, or we can use our, again, I tweaked it just a bit. I took the T-bar, I tweaked it just a bit. Square feet can go on top, length on the bottom left, width on the bottom right. The problem you guys just did, length times width. We're going to see one in just a minute. It gives you square feet, it gives you width. It asks you for the front foot. So I think that's where the T-bar helps us know when to divide and when to multiply. Okay, so now that we know that, as we said a few minutes ago, the front foot is what runs along the road. So 150. If you want to use the length times width, which is what you guys did because you didn't know about the T-bar, so we'll do that. Length times width equals square foot. So if you say your length of 150 times your width of 50 gives you square feet of 7,500, or you can use the T-bar. So 7,500 is our square feet. And then we want to know how many acres. Stop and ask yourself, is 7,500 more than or less than 43,560? It is less than. So do I have more or less than an acre? I have less than an acre, right? So if your answer is more than an acre, your answer choice is more than an acre, you can go ahead and eliminate that. So we know we're being asked to find the acres. I now know my square feet is 7,500. And I know my magic number, 43,560. Take 7,500, divide it by 43,560, and you get, and I rounded, as I think most of you guys did, 0.17. When it comes to rounding, they say if you go out at least 3 decimal places and then round, you're going to be. But guys, don't stress out about rounding. You cannot miss a problem by rounding alone. So in other words, the answer choices, you're not going to have one that says 0.17 and another one that says 0.72 and another one that says 0.1721763, which is what I actually got on my calculator. So they're not going to give you those 3 together as an answer choice, right? The answer choices aren't that close that you can miss by rounding alone. So if you were working this out, again, we found the front foot is 150. We took length times width to get square feet. And then we took our square feet divided by 43,560. So again, converting acres to square feet to acres. If they ask you for acres, they're not going to give you square feet. I'm telling you guys this. They're going to give you the information you need to find square feet. So it's going to be a multiple step problem. So you would have gotten 5. Yeah. And again, just by looking at that number, sometimes you can just stop and ask yourself, does that look right? Questions? Again, I got a few problems I'm going to let you guys work, rest assured. A little bit more to talk about. One thing you may see in your practice, you may have some practice problems about the city paving the street or filling potholes or something. And they may put, if it's a private road, for example, they may put an assessment on the homeowners. We're going to talk about private roads in Unit 6, so we'll come back to that. The trick to doing those kind of problems is understanding that you own a house on one side of the road and somebody else owns a house across the street from you. So you're not going to be responsible for the entire amount of the assessment because you share that with your neighbor across the street. So the trick to that is knowing once you get to the amount, then you want to divide by 2 because you're going to share that with the person that lives across the street from you. Right? So let's just say, for example, they're assessing your front foot's 150 and they're going to charge all the homeowners, I don't know, $40 per front foot. So for every front foot, they're going to charge $40. So 150 times 40 is $6,000, but you don't have to share that whole expense because you have somebody that lives across the street from you, right? So you guys are going to share that. So what's your responsibility? You'll only have to pay half of that. A question came in, can you mark on the PowerPoints and Learn Test Pass? No, the PowerPoints and Learn Test Pass are PDF. So unless you have, if you have a PDF editor, you could print. That's going to be a lot of paper by the time we get done though. But if you want to print away. Questions on square feet, acres, converting. Again, I've got a couple I'll let you guys work in just a minute. Got a few more things to talk about first. Questions on anything we've talked about so far? Okay. Another formula that you may see, and I'm stressing the word may, but the syllabus talks about it, so we are too. You may be asked for a formula for square yards. There are 9 square yards in a square feet. So how you get to square yards, you find length times width. You first find square feet, and then you just divide by 9. Square yards is what they use when you're measuring for like carpet or tile or laminate flooring. So you first find square feet. How do you find square feet? Length times width. And then you take that square feet and divide it by 9. And that gives you square yards. And that's the number you can take into Lowe's when you're ordering new carpet. Why by 9? Because there's 9 square yards in a square feet. Square foot. Length times width gives you square feet. We're all good with that, right? Length times width equals square feet. There are 9 square yards in a square foot. So you find square feet, divide by 9. That gives you square yards. Okay. Some verbiage that we use in the industry a lot. We talk about cost per square foot and cost per acre. If I'm asking about cost per square foot, I'm asking how much does every square foot cost? How many, of all the square feet in this house, how much does each square foot cost? If we're talking about cost per acre of this whole tract of land, how much does each acre cost? Remember we said sometimes in math, when you see the word per, it means divide. So when they tell you cost per square foot, they're giving you the formula. So how do you find how much each square foot costs? You take the total cost of the property. How much does the property cost? I'm just making stuff up as I go. The property costs $500,000. There are 3,000 square feet. 500,000 divided by 3,000 tells us that every, and I just rounded, every square foot in this house costs $167. The cost of the property divided by the total number of square feet tells us the cost per square foot, which means every square foot costs $167. We can do the same thing with acres. You have a tract of land. It's $1 million tract. I'm sorry, the cost of the land is $1 million. How much does this entire land cost you? $1 million. There are a total of 18 acres in this tract of land. So you take 1 million, the cost of the land, divided by the number of acres, which is 18, which tells us, woo, this is the problem with stuff on the fly sometimes, which tells us that each acre in this tract costs $55,555. How much does this acre cost? $55,555. This one, every single acre in that tract of land. And that's all we're saying is, how much does each square foot cost? How much does each acre cost? Yes. 9 square yards should be a square foot. I think you're getting deeper in that than what you need to than what you need to know. You guys heard me when I say if you see square yards on your test, right? I think that's right, Tara. That's not a dumb question. I'm not 100% myself. So again, it's verbiage that we use in the industry. We talk regularly about cost per square foot, cost per acre. What we're actually doing is determining how much does each square foot cost, how much does each acre cost. Questions on this? All right, back to square yards. We're going to do this. All right. I don't know what else I can say about this. Is square yards used much? If you're measuring for carpet or tile or laminate, then you're going to use square yards. Square yards is talked about. We mentioned it on page 80 in the math concepts. You can also see more about square yards. Square yards on page 777.
Julie,
Yes.
I think my problem is that I heard you say 9 square yards equals 1 square foot.
No, you heard me say
Okay.
there are 9 square yards in 1 square foot. So 9 square yards. Yeah, 9 square yards. So you find square feet. How do you find square feet?
Okay.
Length times width. And then you divide by 9 to get to square yards.
Okay.
So on page 80, and I think I just said page 777.
Thank you.
Okay. Another shape you may encounter when you're measuring a home is something called a trapezoid. When are you going to see a trapezoid? When you're measuring for a bay window. So a bay window, there's a part of the house that kind of juts out from the house. So for example, and again, excuse my, I'm not going back to square yards, you guys. I've told you what you need to know for your test. We gotta move on. Page 80 and 777, or go to Google if you want to learn more. I also said if you see that on your test. So I'd rather focus on things that I know you will see, if that's fair. Okay. So a trapezoid, let's say you have a bay window in a kitchen, and the kitchen is a rectangle. Guys, remember, the only shapes that I know how to measure are squares, rectangles, and triangles. Okay. So if you have a trapezoid, what you're looking at is you have a part of the kitchen. This is your square. No, but then you have a part of the kitchen that kind of juts out a little bit. So it kind of comes something like this. So we can measure the kitchen using length times width. But we need to know how to measure the trapezoid, the bay window, to include the total square footage. Remember, the only shapes that I can measure, the only thing I know how to measure are squares and rectangles. So if I'm looking at a shape, and this is our trapezoid, I just kind of took this picture image right here and blew it up and put it over. If I'm looking at a shape that isn't a square, rectangle, or triangle, then I kind of need to chop it up and make it into shapes that I can measure. So when we see a trapezoid, you need to chop it up. You need to see a trapezoid consists of one rectangle and two triangles. Do you guys see three shapes in that trapezoid? Do you see a triangle, a rectangle, and a triangle? So I can't measure the bay window as it is. So how do I measure the bay window? I chop it up into shapes that I can measure. So let's go in the back of your book. Let's look at a picture together. And let's look on page 779 together. So on page 779, you have your trapezoid. The top part of the trapezoid is 10 inches. The bottom part of the trapezoid is 14. So the top is 10, the base is 14, and the depth is 2. And this is what we're looking at on page 779. So if I break that down into three shapes, the first shape, my rectangle, is 2 by 10. You guys see that? How long is the rectangle? It's 10 feet long. It's 2 feet high, or inches. I'm sorry, inches. Or feet. No, feet. So I found the square foot of the rectangle. 10 times 2 gives me 20. And then I measure each triangle. Remember, a triangle is half a square. So length times width divided by 2. Since I've already used up 10 square feet for the rectangle, 14 minus 10 is 4. And then I divvy each side. One triangle gets 2 square feet, and another triangle gets 2 square feet. So now to solve for the triangle, 2 times 2 equals 4. Divided by 2 equals 2. Why did I divide by 2? Because that's what the square feet, that's how we find the square feet of a triangle. So once I find the square feet of my three shapes, then I just add them up. The 20 square feet of the rectangle plus the 2 square feet of the triangle, one triangle, and the 2 square feet of the other triangle gives us a 24 square feet for the bay window that I then add to the square feet of the kitchen. And that gives me the total square foot of that area. Again, you guys, we can only do squares, rectangles, and triangles. Those are the shapes that we know how to measure. So if it's not in one of those shapes, like the trapezoid, we have to make it into those shapes because this is our wheelhouse. This is what we know. I showed an octagon house one time. It was an octagon and had 8 sides. And the buyer was a friend of mine. And the buyer looked at me and she said, "How would you measure this?" And I said, I wouldn't. This is out of my wheelhouse. I would hire somebody to come measure it for me. Somebody with much more experience with measuring than what I have. Because what do I know? I know how to measure squares, rectangles, and triangles. We'll talk all about measuring in Unit 8. Question came in, who would pay for it? Anything's negotiable. Am I going to pay for it? Is the seller going to pay for it? Are we going to split that cost? It's all negotiable. Okay, does everybody see 3 shapes? That's the key to this. If you don't have a shape that you can measure, chop it up and make it into a shape that you can measure. Questions? Okay. So I'm going to put a problem on the board. You guys set your private chat to A, B, C, or D. Nope. Private message and tell me, there we go, in a private message, A, B, C, or D. So let me give you just a few minutes to think it through. Tell me A, B, C, or D, and then we'll come together and talk about it. Give you about 30 more seconds. Okay. So when we see a math problem, what do we do first? You just pick up your calculator and start playing with the numbers? No, no, just read it first. Just Sit on your hands if you have to, but just read it first. Understand what it's asking, what it wants you to do. So this one says a lot with a depth of 80 feet and an area of 4,800 square feet was sold for $350 per front foot. What was the total sales price? Now that we've read the problem, let's stop and ask ourselves, what is this problem asking? What does it want me to find? What does it want me to find? The total sales price. So remember we talked about cost per square feet a few minutes ago. What's the opposite of divide? Multiply. So if I took cost per square feet, cost divided by square feet to get to the total number of square feet, now I can take the total square feet or front foot times the cost to get the total sales price. I'm kind of working backwards here. Do I know the front foot? Do I know the front foot? Not yet. So now what should that tell me to do? I got to go back in the problem and get some more information, right? You see how we're working backwards? We're starting with where we want to end, and we're getting the information that we need to get to. I'm a visual person. And when I do land problems, I like to see my land. I like to picture my land. So the problem tells me that there's a depth of 80. I know the front foot runs along the road, but at this point, I don't know my front foot, right? So my front foot is my X, that's my unknown variable. And I know the total square feet is 4,800. So now that I have my visual, I know what I'm solving for is my length. I know my total square feet goes on top. And I know my width is 80. In my opinion, this is where the T-bar helps, because I know I got to divide something. What do I divide? This is where the T-bar helps me know how to divide. So you're either saying length times width equals square feet, or front feet, or yeah, length times width equals square feet, or we can use the T-bar. And if we take 4,800 square feet divided by 80, I get total front feet of 60. At this point, you can stop and check yourself, right? Length times width equals square feet. 60 times 80 equals 4,800. Does it check? It does. So we have our front foot. The cost is $350 per front foot, so $350. Each front foot costs $350. Everybody hear what I'm saying? This front foot costs $350. This front foot costs, every single front foot on this property costs $350. So if I have 350 per front foot, I now know I have 60 front feet. 350 times 60 gives me a total cost of this lot of $2,100. The depth, why I need the depth is to help me find the front foot. So the depth is 80. You see that there? So what I need the depth for is to get me to the front feet. So there's information in the problem that may not get me to the answer. These are multi-step problems. Questions on this one? If you got it wrong, do you see where? Do you see where? Practice. I think practice, practice, practice. I got plenty of practice for you guys. We got the recording. If you see it a different way, fantastic. If you got A differently, great. Do y'all think Michael Jordan was awesome the first time he picked up a basketball? Do you think he just picked up a basketball and he was like, boom, I got this. I'm going to be an all-star NBA player champion. He might have been all right, but how do you think Michael Jordan got to be where Michael Jordan is today? Practice, practice, practice. He was probably outside in his driveway in the middle of the night dribbling a basketball when he was a kid. You guys with me? This is your basketball. This is how we learn. This is how we get great. Well, that's interesting, James. I didn't know that. Wouldn't we, okay, so to find total price, no, because to find price, we use cost per square foot or cost per front foot. Cost per square feet. So what's the cost? $350 per front foot. So what's the total sales? $350. Okay. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I got one more that we're going to work together. And then we're going to look at where you guys can get some practice. Remembering I'm around to help. I'm here this weekend. So let's take 10. When we come back, we'll do one more. We'll wrap up unit 4, and then we'll go back to where we are in unit 5. All right. We're back. Oh, look at y'all eating breakfast. Man. All right. Camera's on. So we can take attendance. Then we're getting ready to wrap up unit 4 and jump back into unit 5 where we left off. So first off, a couple of you came in the chat, and I appreciate you guys letting me know. I apologize for the confusion. I misspoke. So that's what caused the confusion, and I do apologize. I believe I said that there are 9 square yards in a square feet. So I think what I should have said is that there are 9 square feet in a square yard. So I apologize. So big picture, what do we need to know for your exam? Length times width equals square feet. Divide by 9 to get square yards. So I said that backwards. Again, I do apologize. There are 9 square feet in a square yard. And this is how we measure for carpet, tile, laminate, etc. Questions on this?
It is still divide, right? There's no change.
Absolutely.
In that? Okay.
Absolutely. Length times width equals square foot. Divide square feet by 9 to get square yards. If you're just coming back from break, we've already taken attendance. Please let me know in the chat. Okay, everybody good on this? Everybody have a formula? Okay. One more for you guys to work. So again, take a few minutes. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Give you about 30 more seconds. Okay. So first, we're just going to read the problem. How many acres are contained in a rectangular land parcel that has a length of 175 feet and a depth of 685 feet? So if we've read the problem, we can start breaking it down, start dissecting it a little bit. What's the question want to know? The question wants to know how many acres. My only focus is how many acres. If I start with my formula to find acres, I can use my T-bar. I know I'm solving for acres. That's my X. Always start with where I want to end. I know my magic number of 43,560. The only other thing I need to solve this problem is square feet. At this point, do I know square feet? Not yet. So what do I have to do to find square feet? I got to go back in the problem and dig around to get the information that I need to find square feet. So I take my land picture, draw my lot because I am a visual person. It has a length or a front foot of 175. It has a depth or a width of 685. How do I find square feet? I take length times width, and I get square feet of 119,875. Is 119,875 more than or less than 43,560? It's more than. So if, I know this problem doesn't, but if there was an answer choice that was less than an acre, couldn't you rule that out right away? If one of these was like 0.99 acres, couldn't you rule that out? So that's how we can kind of just stop periodically and look at what you have where you're at to help yourself work through the problem. So now that I know my square feet, I can come back and plug it in. And now I can solve for X. To solve for X, remember the back fourth line on my T-bar means divide. The up down line means multiply. The back fourth line means divide. So if I take 119,875, divide it by 43,560, I get how many acres? I get 2.75 acres, or A. Questions? Again, this is from Unit 4. Yes. From Unit 4, I think the big math is going to be square feet and acres and doing those conversions. We'll look at just a second at where you guys can get some extra practice for the math. Okay. So this officially wraps up Unit 4. Unit 4 was a two-parter, wasn't it? We started it Tuesday and now we're finally finishing it today. So just a refresher, what we talked about on Tuesday, those key terms, remember our legal description and our survey. So those key terms are on page 71. The key point review is on page 81. Remember, the key point review is kind of our Cliff's Notes. And then the student quiz on page 82 to 84. There is some practice, some math on 82 to 84. And then with the math practice, there's the math concepts on page 80. If you guys will turn to page 80 with me really quick. And please hear me when I say this. There's more math in Unit 4 than what you need to know for your test. There's more in Unit 4 than what you need to know. So how do you know what to focus on? How do you know what to concentrate on? The stuff that we just talked about in class. If we didn't talk about it, you don't have to worry about it. Is that good news? Everybody shake your head yes. So I just want to point out, when you guys get to page 8, you're going to be like, what? We didn't talk about that. When you get to the math facts in the back of the book, 775 to 779, there's more back there than what you need to know for your test. So just focus on what you need to know for your exam. Fair enough? We got those 50 problems in the back of the book on pages 803 to 808. The numbers you're looking at are the numbers that relate to the math that we just went over. So this is more practice for you. Remember, I think the 50 problems in the back of the book can get really tricky. So build your way up to those 50 problems in the back of the book, specifically these numbers. Focus on these numbers once you master the rest of it. Question came in, what percent of math? That I don't know. I'm going to say you're going to have, I mean, on my exam, there's like 8 to 10 math questions. On your state exam, I'll say 8 to 12. So let's say on average 10. Remember what I said the other day, you guys, math alone can't fail you. You can miss the 10 math questions and still pass the test. But if you can get some of this math, it may help you pull up your score, some of these other areas of weakness. Math alone can't fail you, but it could help you. And then there's some practice and learn, test, pass as well. I'll show you that when we get to the end of unit 5, because 4 and 5 are kind of lumped together. So I'll show you where that practice is and learn, test, pass when we get to the end of unit 5 soon. Do I create the exam? No. No, this comes straight from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Their class, their test, their show. Okay, questions on unit 4? All right, so we are going to fast forward in time. We started unit 5 on Tuesday, so now we're going to fast forward in time and go to where we ended. And the last thing that we talked about was this crazy idea of adverse possession. Remember, adverse possession, the claimant can take title to the property. If they can go in front of a judge and claim ocean, then they can take title to the property. The judge can give them the property. Is it a portion of the property, for example, where the fence is, or is it in the entire property if they're living on the property or using the property? So adverse possession, remember we talked about easement by prescription in unit 3. Easement by prescription is permission to be there. The court's granting you're already there. Now you get permission to be there from the courts. Adverse possession is taking it a step further and taking title, taking ownership. And we said, you're going to see kind of scattered throughout your book, there's this idea, this lawsuit, action to quiet title. If the action to quiet title is ever brought to the courts, it's a legal process, and it's just a lawsuit to resolve any title disputes. So if there's any title disputes, the courts will get involved and they'll take action to quiet title. And I think the very last thing we said on Tuesday is we talked about this example. So you're contacted by a client that wants to sell 5 acres of land. You meet the client and they say, well, I don't actually have a deed to the property, but I've been working the land for the last 25 years. Guys, I can't say, oh, well, by adverse possession, it's your property. I'm not the judge. I can't make that call. Don't list the property because it may not be the seller's to sell. It may not be theirs to sell. It may not be the seller's to sell. So if you ever find yourself in this situation, this is one of those times a little flag goes up and you need to know that we need to get an attorney involved. And that's what we need to advise that client to do before you list it. So this is where we ended on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we were talking about title, and we talked about where we are is talking about different ways that you can transfer title. So we had voluntary alienation. Title is transferred through voluntary alienation via a deed. We talked about the essential and the non-essential elements of a deed. We also talked about involuntary alienation, involuntarily separating yourself. Yes, please. Involuntary separating yourself from your title. So we talked about escheat, eminent domain, foreclosure, adverse possession. So continuing on talking about different ways that we can transfer title, voluntary, involuntary. Another way to transfer title is by descent. If somebody passes away by descent, they die with no will, but they have heirs. Remember, we said escheat was no will, no heirs. Descent is no will, but with heirs. Okay, so in North Carolina, if somebody passes away without a will, the state may create a will. They may try to find heirs. They may try to do, pass along the property. If they can't find heirs, it's escheat and the state will take the property. So descent, if anybody passes away by descent, they don't have a will, the state will find their heirs. And then the other way of transferring title that we're going to talk about is by a will. Individual passes away, the property is willed to whomever. So the real property and the personal property is transferred by will. Just as a side note, when you're talking will language, a devise is referring to real property. A bequest is referring to personal property. Questions on the methods of transferring title: voluntary alienation, involuntary alienation, descent, or by will? Correct. Voluntary, involuntary, descent, and will. Okay. So as a quick refresher, what we talked about on Tuesday, we talked about title, we talked about deed. We said title is the right to ownership. Title is the idea of ownership. Deed is the documentary evidence. Title and the deed work hand to hand. One is the idea, the other is the proof. Okay, they both represent the owner's bundle legal of rights. Remember, we talked about the bundle of legal rights in Unit 2, or twigs. They both protect the owner from other parties. As an owner of property, as the owner of record, the last thing you want is somebody showing up trying to lay claim to your property. Somebody showing up saying, this is mine. That's why we have the deed. The title is just an idea. The deed is the proof. And one of the biggest responsibilities of the closing attorney is to make sure that when the buyer takes title, when the buyer gets the deed, they don't have to worry about anybody showing up and saying, this is my property. So the buyer hires the closing attorney. The closing attorney represents the buyer in their best interest. And one of the best ways the attorney can protect their buyer client is to do these very thorough title examinations. The attorney generally starts with a public record search. They're going to go on public record down at the Register of Deeds or online now, most counties. And the attorneys do this very thorough search of the public records to find everything about this title, everything about this deed, everything about this property, to assure that their buyer client doesn't have to worry about third parties, anybody else showing up, say, nah, this is my property. So the whole reason that we record, the whole reason that we put documents on record is to give everybody notice, is to let everybody know this is mine. Homeowners, where you at? Your deed is public record. What does that mean? Go to the Register of Deeds of the county that you live in, and you can find your deed. You don't have to log in. You don't have to create an account. It's public record. If you're not a homeowner, go find the property where you live. If you're renting, you can go find your landlord's deed. It's out there. You can go find my deed this afternoon if you want to. That is public record, which means anybody in the world has access to that information. If you will, I'm just going to mention briefly, look on page 96. On page 96, it talks about notice. If you're giving constructive notice, I just gave you guys constructive notice. Your deed's on public record. Actual notice is, me, for example, Tara, your deed is on public record, right? I just told all of you, big picture in general, public record, it's there. Actual notice specifically telling you direct knowledge. So you all have just received actual notice and constructive notice, just like that. Even though this information is public record, you and I can go search for on behalf of our buyer. But the one thing that we can't do is offer legal advice. So even if you were to go out and do this research, your opinion doesn't matter. That's why we have the attorney. The attorney gives their opinion on the title once they do this search. Guys, sometimes just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Let the attorney do their job. Their job is to do this thorough search of the public record. And upon performing their search, they give their opinion on title. One thing that the attorney is looking for is this chain of title. They're looking for linking conveyances. Let me make sure I say this right. Give me 1 second to make sure I say this right. The grantor, who's the grantor? The giver, the seller. The grantor on this deed has to match the grantee on the previous deed. On the previous deed, the grantor of that deed has to match the grantee, of the those chains of titles. The grantor of this deed has to be the grantee of the previous deed, the grantor on this one. And that's how the attorney's making sure that those chains link. And if there's a kink in the chain, if there's a gap in the chain, then there's a cloud on title on the property. A cloud on title is just referring to a defect on the title. So if there's a kink in the chain, if there's something missing in those linking conveyances, then we have a cloud on title, and it's the closing attorney's responsibility to get that cleared up for the owner, for the buyer, I should say, for the buyer, before we convey, before they take title. How do they get it cleared up? It just all depends on what that kink is. It might be that they have to go and stand in front of a judge and request an action to quiet title. Remember, we just said an action to quiet title is the legal process to clear this defect. This is why in North Carolina, buyers have closing attorneys, is for this title examination, is to make sure that there are no kinks in the chain, that there are no cloud on the title. And again, in the title examination, if the attorney finds any, they owe that to their buyer client to get it cleared up before that buyer takes title. Question came in, would death and inheritance could be considered a cloud on title? Sure, if it's not done properly. I mean, some of this stuff gets complicated, right? You could have heirs and heirs as heirs and heirs as heirs as heirs. Remember those tenant in common, for example, we talked about? How many people, how many heirs you got, how many owners you got. Remember, North Carolina is a spousal state. Takes 1 to buy and 2 to sell. So if there's 20 people on the deed, and all 20 of those people are married, it means we got to have 40 people showing up willing to convey that title. You guys with me? So sometimes these get messy. Sometimes these get very, very tricky. So if there's any kink in the chain, the attorney's going to get that straightened out before the new owner, before the buyer takes title. Once the attorney decides, they offer this marketable title. Goodness, 32 people on their deed. It's a lot of people. Once the attorney's opinion is called marketable title. Once the attorney does their research, if they determine that it's good, they're not going to tell you it's good. They're going to tell you that it's marketable. And marketable title is the seller's duty to the buyer to deliver. That's the one thing that this one of the few things that the seller has to do. We'll look at seller and buyer's responsibilities when we look at our contract in Unit 10. But the seller has to deliver this good title, this marketable title to the buyer. And who determines if it's marketable? The buyer's attorney, the closing attorney. Question came in, how can you be on the title, not the mortgage? Well, the lender, we're going to talk about financing. Don't get ahead of yourself here, but the lender may not require all 40 people to be on the loan, right? But all 40 people might be on the title. Two different things. Keep those separate. Title and deed and mortgage. We'll talk about financing. Okay. Again, the title search is the attorney's examination of the public records, thorough examination of the public records. They're looking for things that affect title. They're looking for kinks in those chains. They're looking for the cloud on title. Depending on the situation, some attorneys may do an abstract of title, which is still a title, a public record search, but it's a condensed version. Think of the Cliff's Notes. They're not reading the whole book. They're just grabbing the Cliff's Notes to get a big picture. How does the attorney decide which one to do? Can't answer that for you. In North Carolina, we have something called the Marketable Title Act. And what the Marketable Title Act says, if the chain of title can be traced back for 30 years without finding a kink, the attorney may say that it's marketable. If they find a kink, they may need to go back more than 30 years. But generally speaking, if they research that title, that deed, back 30 years, and they don't find any kinks in the chain. So what if somebody owns property for 35 years? Should we not do a title search? I mean, all you have to go is go back 30 years, and if you're good. So if you've owned the property for 35 years, you know it's not encumbered, right? No, even if somebody's owned the property for 35 years, the attorney's going to still do a title search, because as the owner of record, if somebody put a lien on you, for example, you may not know that lien is there. So just because you've owned the property for longer than 30 years, if you're buying a home that somebody's owned more for 30 years, the attorney's still going to search it. He's still going to search the public records. Again, you may not always know. A question came in, kinks mean that there's no encumbrances. Any discoverable encumbrances, again, we're making sure that the grantor on this deed matches the grantee on this deed. The grantor on that deed matches the grantee, right? We're linking those conveyances. Think of a bicycle chain. We're linking those conveyances from one deed to the previous deed to the deed before that, and so on. I had a I had a pre-licensing student argue with me one time. She and her husband were building new construction, and she didn't want to pay for the attorney to do a title search. And she was trying to get her agent, convince her agent to convince the attorney not to do this title search. Why? Because it's new construction. And what we couldn't get through to her was that it's the property. Just because she's building a new home doesn't mean that the land hasn't been around for ever and ever and ever. Does that make sense? Structures come and go. Land is there forever. I understand what her thinking was. This house is brand new. It's not encumbered, but it's not the structure. It's the property, the parcel. And that's what the attorney is looking for. Attorney doesn't come out to the property and see what structures are on it. You guys with me? They're searching the title to the land, the title to the property. I don't know if because my agent says the same thing. Okay, you now got two of us telling you the same thing. Listen. Questions on Marketable Title Act? All right, we've danced all around title insurance. We've talked about it a couple times, but now we're actually here. So let's talk about title insurance. Let me suggest that you guys hold your questions for just a minute, because I know there's a lot of questions on title insurance. So let me talk about it, and then I'll open it up for questions. Title insurance protects the current owner from anything that comes up on the title that may not have been discovered through the attorney's title examination. Title insurance protects the current owner for errors of the past. Did the previous owner affect the title that the attorney didn't find? Did the owner before them, the owner before them, the owner before them? In the event something comes up when the current owner owns the property that was not discovered during the title search, title insurance is there to protect the current owner from errors of the past. With title insurance, there are two policies if a lender is involved. If a lender is involved, title insurance is required. Period. End of story. If it's a cash buyer, title insurance is highly recommended. So if a lender is involved, there's two policies. There's the owner policy. This is the current owner, the person that owns the property now. Their policy covers them for the amount of the purchase price. And they're covered for as long as they own the property. If you own it for 2 years, if you own it for 50 years, the lender or the owner is covered for as long as they own the property. The lender's policy is a diminishing liability, which means as you pay your loan down, their interest in the property is less and less and less. And once you pay that loan off, the lender's policy disappears. Because once you pay that loan off, the lender's no longer around. Title insurance is a one-time fee. The buyer gets to pay for both policies at settlement. It's a one-time fee. It's not like they have to renew it every year. So at settlement, they pay a one-time fee for two policies. They get to pay for their own policy, and they get to pay for the lender's policy. Just some examples. You guys make notes. I'll let you guys look at this outside of class. On page 99, just make a couple notes to check these things out. Page 99 is some reasons, some examples of things that might show up that weren't discoverable during the title search. Kind of give you an idea. Again, if the attorney's doing their job, but not everything can be found. Not everything is discoverable. And then further down, page 99, There's some figure 5.3. There's just kind of an idea for you about the owner's title insurance policy, what all it covers. So once the attorney does their very thorough public record search and they have their opinion on title, the attorney gives their opinion to the title insurance company. Title insurance won't issue coverage until they get that opinion from the closing attorney. Unit 21 walks us through the contract to closing process. So we'll actually see this again. And one of the very last things that the attorney does before they record the buyer's new deed is offer their opinion to the title insurance company. So the title insurance company can offer coverage to both the lender and the new owner. Questions on title insurance? So let's look at a couple examples together, make sure we're good. A title policy is issued on July 12th, 2027. It's later discovered that a 2010 deed to the seller was forged, thus making it void. Title insurance will indemnify the buyer because this title defect existed prior to the effective date, errors of the past, and there's no way the attorney could have discovered it. There's no way that a search of the public records, the attorney could say, oh, clearly that's a forged document. You guys with me? The attorney can only do so much. So if we find out later that the document was forged and it's void, that's what protects the current owner. That's what we mean by errors of the past. Okay, so you bought the property, you find out after you own it, this document was forged. This is why the buyer, current owner, has title insurance. Let's look at another example. Remember the other day we were talking about surveys and title insurance? Buyer's buying a home and declines to have a survey done before closing. After closing, the buyer discovers that the neighbor's garage encroaches on the buyer's property by 2 feet. The owner's title insurance policy is not going to compensate the buyer, the current owner, because that's something they could have discovered had they had the survey done. So kind of a last ditch effort to encourage, again, surveys are not usually required. They're recommended, but they're not usually required. And when you're trying to encourage your buyer to have a survey done, explain to them, if something's found after settlement that could have been discovered had you had a survey done, title insurance is not going to protect you. Title insurance is going to say, well, if you had a survey done, we would have taken care of this before closing. You opted not to do it. I'm not going to help you. Why would one forge a deed? I have no idea. I don't know why people do what they do. Does forgery happen? Sure. Attorneys and lawyers and courts try hard not to make sure that it happens, but unfortunately it does happen. Look on page 100 with me. You guys see that first in practice? That paragraph there is straight from our offer to purchase and contract, the one we're going to look at in unit 10. There's a whole bunch of words in there that we now know, right? General warranty deed, fee simple, marketable, and insurable title, mechanics liens, free of any other liens, encumbrances, survey, ad valorem taxes, easements, covenants, That pretty much sums up the first several units, right? That's kind of what we're doing in these first couple units, is building up. Again, this is straight from our offer to purchase and contract. The seller's promising the buyer all of this. We'll look more at our offer to purchase and contract in unit 10. Questions about title insurance? So let's talk a little bit more about this title recordation. Again, the whole reason that we record is to serve public notice. Placing the document in public record, let the world know, hey, this is my property. I am the owner of record. If we didn't have it out there for public knowledge, how would you know I own this property? I could tell you I have title, but title is the idea. I could say I have title. You could say you have title. That person over there could say they have title. Deed is what gives me the proof. Deed is what we put on record to tell the world, to serve that public notice and tell the world, this is mine. I'm the owner of record. Most counties, let me say this, we're all over the state now. So most of our counties here in the triad, our counties in the triad and our surrounding counties. So if you're in the triad or surrounding county, we e-record. I imagine most counties across the state do, but I can't speak for that. You maybe have a county or two that doesn't e-record. What do I mean by e-record? The last act, the last thing that happens in settlement is the attorney records the buyer's new deed. It's not a done deal until that new deed is recorded. That's the very last act. And again, we'll talk more about that in unit 21. So e-recording, I mean, literally, you guys, the attorney hits a button, it goes to the register of deeds, they record it and they reply with confirmation, and poof, it's done. Once upon a time ago, attorneys or their runners had to go down to the county courthouse, stand in line, wait to get that deed, wait to hand them the piece of paper. So e-recording has sped up the process greatly. The attorney is not a done deal. The attorney e-records it. Once we get confirmation from the register of deeds, that's when we know that it's official. You will get an email from the paralegal that says the deed has been recorded. And that's when you know it's a done deal. At that time, you can give buyers their keys to their brand new home. At that time, that's when me and you get paid. So when you get that email that says we are on record, do a big U-turn, go back and get your check. We'll talk more about that process in unit 21. But the very last act of settlement is the attorney putting the buyer's brand new deed on record. With recordation, there's a certain order that the attorney has to go in. Remember we talked about lien priority? So before you convey the property, if you have any liens on the property, you have to pay those off. The attorney will record the seller's lien satisfaction. So they'll record that the seller's mortgage has been satisfied. They'll record that the seller's mechanic's lien has been satisfied. There's a certain order that the attorney has to do things. And once they've recorded the seller's lien satisfaction, then they can record the buyer's new deed. We don't want any of the seller's previous liens affecting the new owner, right? So we're going to satisfy those liens, record the new deed, let the buyer start over with a brand new slate. If they're getting a loan, if the buyer's getting a loan, as soon as their new deed is recorded, the very next thing the attorney will do is record their new mortgage. Congratulations, you just bought a house. Here are the keys. You already have a lien on your property. If you got a loan, if you're a cash buyer, no mortgage. So there's a certain order the attorney does things. So we have a certain time stamp. So everything lines up appropriately. Questions so far? We got a little bit more to say about title. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a break. Mindy, what page are you on? We'll come back in 10 and keep talking about title. All right. Doing good? Everybody doing all right? Hanging in there with me? This is the attorney's unit. Let's be honest with each other. Some of this information is a little dry. Most of us aren't in law school because this stuff can be dry and hard. All right, so let's, I'm going to take attendance. And we're awfully close to wrapping up Unit 5. Okay. We kind of introduced you to a North Carolina law last week, or on Tuesday, last class. You guys remember us talking about the Connor Act? We talked about the Connor Act when we were talking about deeds. And a valid deed, one of the essential elements of a valid deed, it doesn't have to be recorded. In order for a judge to determine that it's a valid deed, it doesn't have to be recorded. The reason that we record deeds is because of the North Carolina Connor Act. So our buddy Connor tells us that there are certain documents that have to be recorded. And why do we record them? Why does Connor want us to record them? So that they are enforceable against third parties. That's the whole reason why we record. Failure to record does not invalidate the document. Failure to record just doesn't make it enforceable. So Connor says, how do we make it enforceable? I'll tell you what, let's put it on record. That's how we make it enforceable against third parties. So the North Carolina Connor Act, you do need to know that. The North Carolina Connor Act says that there are certain documents that have to be recorded in order to be enforceable. Guys, that's a complete sentence. They have to be recorded in order to be enforceable. What are these certain documents that Connor says that we have to record? Well, this list is in your book on page 101. Connor says we have to record the deed. We have to record the deed of trust. In North Carolina, the deed of trust is just a fancy way of saying our mortgage. Protecting the lender's best interest. Again, we'll talk about mortgage and deed of trust, unit 14. Connor says leases for more than 3 years have to be recorded. Could you record a lease for a year? If you have a 1-year lease, could you put it on record? Sure, that would be up to you though. That wouldn't be up to Connor. Guys, your test is not going to ask you what you're going to do. Your test is going to ask you, what does Connor tell you you have to do? Everybody hear what I'm saying? Connor says any leases for more than 3 years have to be recorded so that they are enforceable. Easements have to be recorded to be enforceable. Restrictive covenants, which we're getting to in unit 6. Installment land contracts and option contracts. We'll talk about these in unit 10. And then assignments. We'll talk a little bit more about assignments in future units as well. Please note, this is probably a problem topic. Not on this list. Something that we don't record are our sales contracts. We do not record sales contracts, and that tends to be a problem topic. The sales contract is the document where the seller promises to convey their property to the buyer. We're not ready to record that. What do we record? we record the done deal. We record the deed. It ain't over till it's over. When is it over? When that deed is recorded.
Okay, I have one question.
Yes.
So it says, so what does it mean in this reading where it says contracts to convey real estate as well as memoranda of the contracts are also covered? So what does that section mean?
Where you
So-
at?
Under the Connor Act? What does it mean as far as memoranda? Contracts to, is that what you mean by after the fact?
Yeah, that is a little misleading. Let me, can I get back to you on that? Let me look
Okay.
into it a little bit that's a good point. Thank you, Essence, for bringing that up.
I'm a star that just,
Yep, me too.
okay.
So let me look into that. I want to be sure before I answer. Okay, thank you. We'll get clarification on that. North Carolina, when it comes to recording, North Carolina uses something called a pure race state. We are a pure race state, which means the first one to get their document recorded at the courthouse or the Register of Deeds wins. It's a race to the courthouse. And the first one there wins. Again, this isn't affecting the validity of the document. But the first one, pure race, the first one to get to the courthouse wins. There's a fascinating example in your book on page 101. Zackerman sells his property to Sands. Sands, for some reason, doesn't record his new deed. 2 weeks later, Shady Zackerman sells the same property to Hanson. Hanson suspects that Zackerman no longer owns the property, but accepts the deed and quickly runs to the courthouse and records it. Because Hanson recorded his deed first, he's now the one with marketable title. Sands may be able to sue Zackerman, but what's the court going to say? The court's going to go to the courthouse and see whose deed is on record. So I think Sands is going to be out of luck in this case. Sands' attorney did not do a good job with it, did they? And that's an example of our pure race state. The first one to get to the courthouse to record their document wins. The bottom of 101 mentions the torn system. We don't see this much in North Carolina. Yeah, that's dirty pool, isn't it? Zackerman messed everybody up. The torn system is, we don't do this much in North Carolina. It's just a land registration system. So you sign up. You're signing up, proves evidence of title. Again, North Carolina is a pure race, and we record because Connor tells us to. North Carolina Connor Act. The last little section in Unit 5 is talking about something called an excise tax. And I said there was a little bit of math in Unit 5. So this is the little bit of math that we're going to look at. The North Carolina excise tax is a tax that sellers get to pay at settlement. They're paying a tax to sell their property. Excise tax, some of us old school people refer to them as revenue stamps. Excise tax can be referred to as transfer taxes. All the same thing. Seller always pays, that's part of their closing costs. Again, when we get into Unit 21, we're going to break down expenses that are the seller's responsibility, we're going to break down expenses that are the buyer's, typically the buyer's responsibility. So excise tax is paid by the seller. The excise tax is always calculated on the purchase price. Please make a note of that. Not the listing price, not the asking price. It's calculated on the purchase price. And in order to calculate excise tax, the purchase price has to be a number that's divisible by 500. So what are numbers that are divisible by 500? Numbers that are divisible by 500 are numbers that end in 000 or 500. If a number is divisible by 500, it means that you can divide 500 into it and get a whole number. You're not going to get cents. You're not going to have anything after the decimal point. So what if? What if the purchase price is not divisible by 500? If it's not divisible by 500, make something up, 250,000. That number is not divisible by 500. So we have to make it divisible by 500. And how do we make it? We round up. Always round up to the nearest 500. So the attorney will take that purchase price of 100,250 and round up to 500,000. Always round up. Even if your purchase price is 100,501. We're always going to round up to the nearest 101, to the nearest 500s. Always round up. Once the purchase price is rounded or divisible by 500, then you just divide by 500. Here's the trick to excise tax. If you ever get change, you forgot to round. Excise tax will always be a whole number. So for example, the sales price is $249,750. $249,750 divided by 500 will give you some change. So we take that $249,750 and round up, always up to the next number divisible by 500, and then just divide by 500. So at settlement, the seller will have a charge, have a debit for $500 for excise tax. And we'll see this again in 21. We talk about closing and settlement statements. Questions on excise tax? They tax you when you buy it, they tax you while you own it, and they tax you when you sell it. Just the way that it goes. Yeah, your book says to multiply by 1. I tend to skip that step. What the book is saying, so let's see, if you have 500, if you take this step right here, what the book is saying is that if you multiply by $1, then that puts the dollar sign in front of the 500. I tend to skip that step because I know that I'm calculating money, right? So if you don't see the money, then you need to add the dollar sign. I agree with you. It seems unnecessary. I think it's really confusing. So when you multiply anything by 1, what do you get? The same number. All you're doing is adding the dollar sign to it. But we already know excise tax is a charge. Charges have dollar signs. So eliminate that step. Okay. Phew. That's unit 5. Unit 5 tends to be tricky because it's our attorney's unit. I don't know that unit 5 is a heavily tested unit, but I know you will see a few test questions on unit 5. So again, focus on what we talked about. Don't try to be a lawyer. Don't try to be an attorney. Stick to the basics. Key terms, page 85. Key point review, 103 to 105. Student quiz, 106 to 107. There should be some excise tax. Is there a couple? Yeah, there's a couple excise tax problems. So you get a little practice with that. Again, we'll see it again in unit 21. And then the math concepts on page 102, that just goes over the excise tax. A little bit more example there, another way to explain it. Just a little bit of math in unit 5, not much. Any questions on unit 5? Okay. Moving on to unit 6. We just keep going. Talk about where we're going. So we leave today, we'll get an idea. And it looks like a lot of us might be snowed in this weekend. So what a great time to study and get caught up, maybe even get ahead a little bit. I hope it doesn't happen and it blows past us and we can all go play outside. But I fear that's not going to happen. It's looking like we're going to get it. Unit 6, in my opinion, is the first unit we come to that actually involves the broker, the real estate agent. Up until this point, we've been building up. We've been defining things, getting ideas, getting concepts, kind of building up to where we're heading. So I think unit 6 is our first true agent unit. And before we get into unit 6, I just want to pause for a second and have a conversation about the importance of understanding the market that you want to work. Okay, so let's talk this through for 1 second. When you get your North Carolina real estate license, that license gives you the ability to act as a broker in any transaction for any property located within the state of North Carolina. That license gives you the ability to work from Murphy to Manteo and anywhere in between. As the professional real estate broker, working the entire state may not be in our client's best interest. You can, but just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. We need to be experts of the market that we want to work. We want to be experts of our industry. Houses come and go. Listings come and go. What we work is the market, is the area. Winston is different than Raleigh. Raleigh's different than Wilmington. And whatever area you choose to work, maybe you want to work a certain subdivision. Maybe you want to work a certain city or a certain county or the triad, for example. Maybe you're willing to go from Manteo to Murphy. You can, but you need to be experts of that market. You need to be experts of where you want to go. So if you're willing to work the whole state, you got to be familiar with all the states' zoning, all the states' public systems, schools. Everybody hear what I'm saying? So just because you can, it may not be in your client's best interest to work Wilmington and Boone. What you choose to work is entirely up to you guys. You can do whatever little as you want. I encourage you to start thinking about, and usually it starts with where we live, right? What city do you live in, or what city do you want to work in, and kind of growing from there. And one way you can start learning your market is by studying that area, studying that market. This is what you're looking at is from Winston-Salem. And this is just their zoning and subdivision. Go to City of Winston-Salem or cityofws.org, or just search city of whatever city you're interested in. And you can start learning the particulars of that city, that area, that county, and kind of working from there. We are the experts of the market. We're the experts of the industry that we work. Okay. Your license said they're not going to regulate you. They're not going to say, well, you live in Winston. Why are you trying to list a house in Wilmington? They're not going to regulate. It's expected that you're going to list a house in Wilmington, or if you're going to assist a buyer working in Wilmington, it's assumed that you have the knowledge, you have the skills to properly assist that seller and that buyer. Does anybody ever go open housing? Go out on Sunday afternoon, go open housing? A couple of you, open houses aren't just for serious buyers, right? We know this. Open houses are tough right now because I have low inventory. If I don't have inventory, I don't have as many open houses. You list something on Friday, it's under contract before Sunday. But as this pendulum starts to swing back and the market starts to come back, there might be more of an opportunity to go open housing. And going open housing is a great way for you guys to start learning what various homes look at. Anybody ever play around on Zillow or realtor.com or something like that? Again, you're kind of learning about your market by learning about the different properties, what they're listed for, what the interior pictures look like, that kind of thing. Start learning your area. Turn highway off of your GPS. Start learning not just where the interstates go, but where other of the roads go, so you can start learning those different areas, that different market. You may or may not know right now where you want to work, and that's fine. That's why I say kind of start small. Start with the area that you live in and start learning various things. And going to the city's website is a good way to start. And zoning is where we're heading in this unit. If you go open housing, the only thing I ask is that you be honest with the agent. Please don't walk in the door acting like a super interested buyer if you're not. Okay, don't give them that hope. If you're going open housing just to see what the inside of that house looks like, just be honest with them. Fair enough. We've all had our hopes held up just for somebody that was just kicking tires. Questions or comments on that? Be in the industry of your market, be in the industry of your where you want to work. Have you guys started thinking about what area you want to do? Are you willing to tackle the triad? If you live in Winston-Salem, for example, and you somehow pick up a buyer working that wants to buy in Burlington, can you help that buyer in Burlington? Can you help that buyer buy a house in Burlington? And I think the answer is, it depends. Are you willing to drive to Burlington to do the work? Are you willing to drive from Winston to Burlington to do the showings and to meet the home inspector once you go under contract and to attend settlement? If you're willing to learn and commute to Burlington, help that buyer buy a house in Burlington. If you're not, maybe consider referring that buyer to an agent in Burlington that does know the area, that does know the market. Does that make sense to everybody? You have to stop and ask yourself, am I willing to do the work? And if you're not, that's okay. But don't do that disservice to your buyer. Yeah, referral fees. Yep. Refer that buyer to Burlington. Somebody said network. Before COVID, I heard somebody tell me once, and I did this for many, many years prior to COVID. Somebody told me once as a real estate agent that once a year, you should go outside of your network to take a class. Once a year, leave the triad and go take a class. Why? If I go to take a class in Wilmington, it allows me to network. It allows me to meet agents in Wilmington. It allows me to make connections And if I ever pick up a buyer that says, I'm moving to Wilmington, can you help me? I'm not willing to drive to Wilmington to show property. I'm not willing to drive to Wilmington to attend the home inspection. But because I now know agents in Wilmington, I can refer them and collect a referral fee. Now COVID happened and we're not traveling anymore. Hopefully we'll get back to that because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed going and networking and meeting, learning about different areas and different markets. Questions or comments so far? Again, any city you want to work, any county you want to work has some kind of city website that you can start exploring, start learning. If you're driving around and you see a for sale sign in the yard, safely pull over, get your phone and look it up. What are they asking for? What's the interior look like? What's the zoning? What's the information? What are the kitchen dimensions? Start paying attention to these things in the listing information, because these are the things, as we get into unit 6, our broker unit, these are what we're starting to do. We're starting to get into the day in the life of. Okay. So unit 6 is our land use control. Oh, Julie, hang on. One more thing. I promised we'd look and learn, test, pass real quick when we finish unit 5. So unit 4, you just got a little pre-test. These pre-tests and learn, test, pass are like these interactive flashcards, if it'll load. Come on. There we go. These interactive flashcards. Are you guys using these? These are kind of fun. It's another good way to expose yourself to the material. There are my PowerPoints in unit 4. Remember, you have the recording too, so you can go back through and review the math that we talked about, and you have the recording. You can go back and watch it. In unit 5, the quiz in unit 5 is actually for units 4 and 5. So there's additional math from unit 4 in this quiz. So I just want to point that out, because you're not going to find it in unit 4. You're going to find it combined in units 4 and 5. We'll Kahoot next week. I already got Kahoot lovers. I'm determined to find a way to teach this entire class using Kahoot. So units 4 and 5, learn, test, pass. Again, good interactive flashcards, quizzes, practice, practice, practice. So many of you tell me I don't test well. So many of you tell me I get test stress. I'm telling you, one way to help alleviate test stress on test day is to start taking tests now. Start practicing now. Start getting comfortable. Set your clock, grade yourself. Start now. We're only week 2 into it. We got what, 6 more-ish? The time will go by fast. I promise you. Okay. Okay. Unit 6. Land use controls. In unit 6, we're going to talk about types of public and private land use controls. We are going to talk about zoning. I got a bunch of zoning terminology, zoning words, again, that we just need to know. You guys are entering into a brand new industry for the most part. With the new industry comes new words, new vocabulary, new terms. So we're going to do a lot of defining stuff in unit 6. And again, this is the first unit that we talk about our responsibility. So we're going to have a conversation that when it comes to land use controls, what's my role? What's my responsibility? So unit 6, let's start first talking about public land use controls. Public land use controls are controlled by, regulated by, enforced by law enforcement. Public land use controls are enforced by the police, by law enforcement. And the police's power should be their right to create and adopt regulations necessary to protect the public. Necessary to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of their citizens. So how are public land use controls enforced? Public land use controls are enforced by law enforcement. There's a list. Just make a note on page 110 at the bottom. Things that public land use controls include, things that law enforcement, if needed, will enforce. All areas, may that be a city or a county or a township or a municipality, all areas have some kind of master plan. The master plan is the long-term plan. Where do we see ourselves in 20 years? Do y'all hate that question? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? I hate that question. I don't know what kind of curveball life's going to throw at me. But the master plan answers that question. Where does this city or this county see themselves in 20 years? Anytime you see a road project, my Kernersville people, that belt loop, how long have they been preparing for that? That was in the master plan years ago. Y'all, I've been in the triad for 21 years now, and they were talking about that belt loop when I got here 21 years ago. Y'all, they just don't wake up one day and say, hey, let's build a belt loop. There's lots of planning that goes into play. There's lots of things that have to be considered before you and I ever start seeing the construction crew out there doing it. And how they know if they need a belt loop, or if they need to, do a bypass, or they need to do any kind of change, is all part of that master plan, that long-term projection, that long-term goal. Part of the master plan generally includes zoning. Zoning is imposed by the local government. Zoning is local in nature. Winston-Salem regulates zoning for Winston-Salem. Raleigh is not going to show up to Winston-Salem and say, this is what you should do for your zoning. Zoning is local in nature. And zoning allows government officials, law enforcement, to regulate and control the use of the land, the use of the structures. Make sure that it's all in compliance with that master plan. Bottom of page 111, it gives you a list of what zoning regulates and affects, various things that zoning could control. So remember back in unit 2, we said most people own property, fee simple, absolute. You do whatever you want to as long as it confines of the law. What law are we referring to? Zoning. You can't use your property that violates zoning ordinances. If you do, you're going to have the law enforcement knocking on your door. Zoning needs to be structured in a way that it doesn't violate the rights of property owners. And zoning needs to be flexible because things change. The master plan needs to understand that things can change, that curveball in life. There's an example in your book on page 112, the top of 112. The example is talking about areas that have abandoned factories or warehouses. And instead of these buildings sitting empty, the government, the municipality can rezone that area and maybe allow those abandoned buildings to be used for other purposes. Maybe we can take this old factory and convert it into an apartment complex or office buildings, an office park. Is this not happening in downtown Winston-Salem right now as we speak? Y'all know the Bailey's power plant, all those RJR buildings we got hanging around? They're converting those things into nice apartments, nice condos. How were we able to do that and revitalize downtown Winston-Salem? It's just a simple change to zoning. It's a simple change to how the public can use that land. Land use control. In this market, everything's, I hate the word overpriced. Values are up all around. Values are up all around, and that does include Bailey's power plant. If that's your thing. Happening in Morganton, yeah, it's one way we can help revitalize a dying area. The governor of Winston-Salem was quoted not too terribly long ago. I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. The governor of Winston-Salem was quoted as saying, 10 years ago, you could shoot a cannon down 4th Street after 5 o'clock and not hit a soul. Things have changed, haven't they? They rechanged some zonings. They attracted businesses. They attracted residents. Now, pre-COVID, even now, I mean, I was in Winston-Salem not too long ago. Have you tried to drive down 4th Street in Winston-Salem on Friday night recently? Goodness, don't hit anybody. There's people everywhere. All you have to do is switch that zoning and you can grow a dying area. And that's what's happening. That's what happened in Winston. Yeah, as you guys are saying, it used to be you didn't go downtown Winston unless you just absolutely had to. Now it's like, oh, let's go downtown Winston. And I think that's something that's pretty common in most places. Now you do have areas that decline, that don't recover from factories and industries closing down. But if you can find a way to revitalize yourself, you're in pretty good shape. We're working on it, William. I'll tell you, as Mr. Peters keeps buying up everything, he's trying single-handedly, isn't he? You guys notice everything's becoming, he's trying. Thank you. Question came in, Matt. I'm getting ready to talk about that in just a second. We're going to talk about historic zoning. So to answer your question, yes, there is a term called historic zoning. So we've rezoned from residential to commercial. That happens a lot. That happens a lot. Okay. So zoning, this is why we say zoning needs to be flexible. If you set zoning as industrial and you said, I just got distracted, your church is now at Arby's. I mean, all hail Arby's sauce, right? So I get it. So if it's not flexible, if you set it as industrial and you can never, ever, ever change that, you can't revitalize. Does this make sense? So that's why it has to be flexible. As things change, zoning's got to be able to go with the punches. With zoning, we have something called the North Carolina Enabling Act. And again, what the Enabling Act says that zoning is local in nature. There is no nationwide zoning ordinances. There are no statewide. Zoning is local in nature. Winston-Salem dictates and regulates zoning for Winston-Salem. You go 15 minutes down the road to Kernersville. Kernersville is going to have different zoning ordinances. Another reason why we may want to rethink before we tackle the entire state of North Carolina. How many different zoning ordinances do you have across the state? Zoning is broken down into just some general classifications. All of these classifications have sub-classifications, but just the big picture, general. Usually for zoning, we see residential areas that are zoned for residential, areas that are zoned for commercial. Commercial might be sub-classified into retail, business, You have zoning for industrial and you have zoning for agricultural. You have areas with mixed zoning, which means you have areas where residential and commercial could be allowed, could be zoned for both. Any questions so far? So we're getting ready to get into some zoning terminology, just zoning terms that we have to know. These may be good candidates for flashcards. You just need to have a general idea of these certain zoning terms, zoning words. So the first zoning terminology we come across is cluster zoning. Cluster zoning is usually what we see around a cul-de-sac. So if you can slightly reduce the lot sizes, it increases your open space. It increases the availability. You can get more homes on a cul-de-sac because of cluster zoning. Question comes in, when you rezone, does that change the taxes? Probably. Possibly. So cluster zoning. Another zoning term we have is a buffer zone. A buffer zone is usually a protected area meant to separate two classifications of zoning. So the most common is what we see as a buffer zone that's going to separate residential from non-residential. So maybe it separates residential from commercial or residential from industrial. This picture you're looking at here, you guys see the red line? You see the strip of trees here? This is our buffer zone. This is going to be a protected area. It's zoned, its purpose is to protect these residents from, and I don't, is this a industrial or a Walmart? I can't tell, but it's not residential, right? So this area is going to be a protected area, a buffer zone, just to help separate these two areas. That's all a buffer zone does. It buffers between two areas. Who owns buffer zones? Probably the city or the county or the municipality. Another zoning terminology is ETJs, extraterritorial jurisdictions. These are zoning ordinances that regulate areas outside of the city limits. Maybe they're not big enough. Maybe they don't have the population to have their own zoning ordinances. So ETJ says, okay, you're just outside of my city limits. You have a small population. I'll handle your zoning ordinances for you. When the population grows and it gets big, the ETJs may separate themselves. If the city annexes them, then they become part of the city. ETJs can regulate up to 3 miles outside of the city limits. Pofftown, yep, Pofftown's a great example. But as Pofftown continues to grow in population, that may change one day, right? Maybe Pofftown can be big enough. I mean, King used to be an ETJ. Have y'all been up to King lately? My goodness, they got a lot going on up there now. King might now be able to separate themselves and be their own zoning ordinances. Oh, glory day, you got a Starbucks. Yay. King's something else. If you haven't stopped off on King lately, go check it out. You got a Walmart, Bojangles. I don't want to talk about food right before lunch. Another zoning term is non-conforming use. A non-conforming use, you're using the property in a way that it doesn't conform. It doesn't conform to the zoning. And there are two types of non-conforming use. One is legal and one is illegal. A legal non-conforming use is grandfathered in. A legal non-conforming use says the use was in place, but then they changed the rule. If they change the zoning, they're probably not going to make the use shut down. They're not going to make you close your doors. They're not going to make you move. You're going to be grandfathered in. You're still a non-conforming use, but you're legal because your use was there before the rule. Think of, for example, a gas station in an old gas station in a residential neighborhood. When that gas station was built in like the 50s, it was zoned to allow that gas station. And at some point along the way, they changed the rule. They rezoned it to residential. They're not going to make that gas station shut down. They're not going to make that gas station close. That gas station is a legal, non-conforming use. They're grandfathered in. Now, what if the owner of that gas station sells? Are they going to let the new owner run a gas station? Probably not. What if the owner of that gas station applies for a permit to do major renovations? Are they going to approve that permit? Possibly not. They'll let you use it as it is because you were there first. An illegal non-conforming use says the rule is in place and you're using the property against the rules. The rule was already there and you showed up and said, I'm going to do something different with it. You now have an illegal non-conforming use. Let's say, for example, you wake up one day and you decide to convert your garage into a hair salon. If that area isn't zoned for commercial and you go do it anyway, you have an illegal non-conforming use. And if and when you get caught, they'll make you shut down that hair salon. So before you convert your garage to a hair salon, what about home daycares? Anytime you're running a business out of your home, you need to make sure it's zoned for that. But if you just go do it anyway, you could be facing an illegal non-conforming use. If and when you're caught, they'll either fine you or they'll make you shut it down. Kate brings up Yellowstone. I need to watch that show. My husband and I, it's on our list. Maybe they'll impose fines on you. Maybe they'll shut it down. Remember you guys, there is no across the board zoning rules. So what are they going to do? It depends on how that zoning is handled. So please understand, both are a non-conforming use. Both are being used in a way that is not allowed. One is okay for now, the other is not. Questions on non-conforming use? Okay, let's take a break. Take 10. And when we come back, we got some more zoning words to talk about. All right. You back for the last hour? Again, the last thing we're going to do today is just kind of talk about what next week's going to look like. Things start getting pretty serious next week. So we've been warming you up. We've been preparing you for what's getting ready to happen. So we'll talk about what you can expect and what you can do to help prepare yourself for next week. So cameras are on. The other thing I want to say real quick as we're coming back, and I'll do this the next couple classes. Usually about this time, I start getting questions about study groups. And here's the deal. Back in the day when we were in person, you guys could go out in the hall on break and form relationships and networks. And somebody would say, hey, after class, you want to go to Panera Bread and study together. So study groups just kind of naturally formed. Probably one of the biggest disadvantages you guys have with being online is you don't have that opportunity to meet each other. So I still want to help facilitate you guys, get you guys together. So if you do want to form a study group, if you're interested in speaking to your peers about a study group, when we're done at 1 o'clock today, I'll leave the call open. I'm going to go away. And you guys, if you're interested in a study group, you can hang out and exchange phone numbers or emails, talk about how you want to meet. Remember, you're all over the place. So you may not be able to meet in person at Panera Bread, but maybe you guys want to talk about doing a Facebook study group or WhatsApp, right? There's no wrong way. I've never been involved in study groups, and I really don't plan on starting now. But I'll leave the call open at 1 o'clock. So for those of you that are interested, you can hang out and network and learn how you want to share information and communicate with each other. Okay. Questions on that? If you just came back, please let me know if you miss attendance. Thank you. So I'll leave the call open, and I'll probably do it next week too. Just again, so you guys have that opportunity to network. But I'm going to go away. I'm actually going to go get lunch. That's what I'm going to do. So you guys can hang on out as long as you need to. Questions on that? Comments? Okay. So getting back into our zoning. And of course, it's completely optional. Some people do good by study groups, some don't. If you don't do good by study groups, don't join a study group. If you do join a study group, I think you need one person to keep you all on point, because it's easy to spend study time chit-chatting. So one or more people need to keep you guys on point, keep you on that track. All right. So non-conforming use, legal or illegal, depending on which was in place first, the use or the rule. Another zoning term is a variance. With a variance, you're asking permission to break the rules. If you're requesting a variance, one person, one property owner is going to the zoning board and saying, your zoning ordinances will not allow me to use the property in the way that I wanted to. Can I have permission to break the rules? In order for this variance to be granted, that one property owner is going to have to prove some kind of hardship. They can't just say, I want to do something different. They have to prove that your zoning rules are affecting the way they have some kind of hardship. And if you don't change their zoning, they can't use the property. So if you want a variance, if you want to request a variance, you just request a meeting at a public hearing. You stand in front of the zoning board, you state your case. And if granted that variance, you have permission to break the rules. William, please remind me after class. My little brain isn't going to remember in an hour. So if you guys will help me for 50 minutes, short-term memory, like a goldfish. So just put that back in the chat after class and I'll grab your YouTube channel again. Yep. That's the key to a variance. One, not multiple, one homeowner. So let's say, for example, there's one of the zoning ordinances that you might have is a setback. A setback tells you from the road, how far back do you have to build? Like there may be rules that say you have to build 10 feet back from the road. That's a setback ordinance. What if you're in this setback ordinance and you can't build closer to 10 feet from the road? Your property has to set back 10 feet from the road. And where you want to build your property with the setback, there's a creek that runs through it. And you can't build your house on a creek, right? So you might be able to go to zoning ordinance and request that you have a setback of 5 feet. So you can build your house closer to the road so it's not sitting over the creek. That would be one homeowner requesting a variance, one homeowner requesting to break the rules. So when you're working with a buyer and you see a home built 5 feet back, are you going to look at your buyer and say, oh, that guy did it? I know you can build your house 5 feet back too. The only thing you know by looking at that home that's built 5 feet back from the road is that somebody put a house there. You don't know if they have a variance or not. Never encourage your buyers to break the rules. Understand that if you see something that looks off, it might be that that owner was requested a variance, or was granted, I should say, granted a variance. A special use permit. So talking about our zoning terminology. Yep, we talked about it being grandfathered in. Yep. Or illegal or a legal non-conforming use. A special use permit, also known as a conditional use permit. One of those things in real estate where we got two different words that mean the same thing. A special use permit, the owner is asking permission to use the property in a way that's best for the public interest. So think like churches, schools. You might have a church in a residential neighborhood. It may not be zoned for that use. That church probably has a special use permit. They were granted permission so the owner or owners are requesting to put this church here because that would be good. That would be best for public use. Another zoning term, zoning amendment. An amendment is just a change. So if you're requesting a zoning amendment, you're requesting to change the zoning. If you want a zoning change, the owners go stand in front of the public hearing, in front of the zoning board, state their case, the zoning board discusses it. How does this fit into our master plan? And if it's approved, they will change the zoning. You guys ever drive around and you see zoning signs? Usually they're white signs with red Z's or red signs with white Z's. That's notifying you that there's a public hearing. There's a proposal on the table for a zoning amendment, and there's a public hearing to discuss that amendment. Down here in Randolph County, we go crazy and our zoning signs are like green and yellow, but I never saw green and yellow until I got to Randolph County. so the color doesn't matter. But usually anytime you see a sign with a Z on it, it's notifying you that there's been a public hearing scheduled to discuss this zoning amendment, to discuss the zoning change. And it's a public hearing, which means you're welcome to go. If it's in an area that you live in and it could affect your home, go. If you're thinking about working that area, brokeraging that area, you may want to go check it out. Check COVID restrictions before you go. They might be limiting how many people are in now. But they're notifying the public that there's a hearing coming up for this zoning amendment. Another zoning terminology is called an overlay district. With an overlay district, you have multiple zonings. You have one zoning overlaying another. A common example of an overlay district is a historic zoning on top of a residential zoning. Two zonings, you got to follow both zoning ordinances, residential and historic. I'm going to talk about historic next. I'm going to date myself. You guys remember what this contraction is? What this thing is down in the bottom corner? This was a projector before we had projectors. If you don't know what this is, please don't tell me. It just makes me feel bad. So what is superimposed? When I think of superimposed, I think of the old projectors. Remember you had those transparencies and you put the transparencies down on the flat screen here, and then it projected the image out through this little light, through this thing. And man, that light got bright, right? Did you ever take multiple transparencies and put them down on top of each other? That's what we're doing when we superimpose. So you have the residential zoning, and on top of it, you lie the historic zoning. So you have both going on, both in that area, and both apply. I did have a student once when we were in person. What's that? Get out. Just made me feel too old. So an overlay district, you have two types of zoning, one superimposed over the other. Maybe an example of an overlay district might be some of these, they're called PUDs, planned unit development. Thank you, James. A planned unit development. The idea of a PUD is you have residential, you have commercial, you have medical, right? The idea of a PUD is you can live, work, and play right here. Everything you need is right here. And that could be an example of an overlay. Residential, commercial with restaurants and grocery stores and drugstores, medical, etc. If there's ever a conflict with two zonings, the stricter of the two will prevail. So if there's ever a conflict, Huntersville is a PUD. My Winston-Salem people, if you go out Stratford Road, go past Haynes Mall, keep going. And there used to be a restaurant on the right called Cities. And I think they just recently opened to something else, maybe a Mexican restaurant that I've heard I need to check out. Does that sound right? Just beyond that, there's an area with a Food Lion and a Sheetz and a medical plaza and condos and apartments. If you're Winston, you know the area I'm talking about. That would be a PUD. That's the idea. Everything I need, I can live, work, and play all right here. Okay. Another zoning term is our historic preservation zoning. The whole purpose of a historic zoning is to preserve the historical nature, preserve the historical value. Old Salem in Winston-Salem is a historic zoning. And the whole purpose of the historic zoning is to keep Winston-Salem keep Old Salem looking like Old Salem. Do you know people live in homes in Old Salem? those homes are occupied. They go up for sale every once in a while. And if you ever purchase a home in Old Salem, if you want to do any changes to the exterior, you have to go through the zoning board to get approval. If you're going to do any changes to the exterior, they're only going to approve changes that allow it to keep looking like Old Salem. You can't paint your house pink in Old Salem. Pink paint didn't exist back in the day when Old Salem was around. So you got to get approval. House built in 1892, and if it falls in the historic zoning, which I'm guessing it might, yep, that's right. You can't use vinyl. Vinyl didn't exist when Old Salem was around, right? The inside of these homes are very modern, very up to date, very nice in some cases. It's the exterior that has to get. Yeah, that's interesting about the tomato plants. I didn't know about that. They just all have their own set of rules, right? I think tomatoes were around when we had Old Salem. They didn't have tomato plants back then. We learn something new every day. It'll be our history lesson for the day. When did we start getting tomato plants? Obviously, it was not in this area. Gotcha. There you go, William. You could move those tomato plants inside, right? You could grow your tomatoes inside. Old Salem just says you can't grow those tomatoes outside. So here's an example, just some verbiage that you might see with this historic zoning. No exterior portion of historic properties can be erected, altered, restored, moved, or demolished until after a certificate of appropriateness has been submitted to and approved by the Historic District Commission. So how do you know you have permission to change your historic zoning? You get this, you go to the zoning board, you request the change, and upon approval, you get the certificate of appropriateness. Again, if you live in an area or you think about buying in a home in an area that's in a historic zoning, you need to follow those and the residential rules, right? So you're in a residential area and you have historic zoning as well. Not HOA, zoning. Okay. Another zoning terminology, again, guys, it's just a lot of words. Best suggestion I have is put these things on index cards. Aesthetic zoning. Aesthetic zoning is zoned for appearance. They want to keep things looking pretty. Maybe they have zoning regulations on exterior color, construction material. A common example of aesthetic zoning that we see is signs. So like your restaurant signs, your retail signs, some areas say signs can only be so high. They don't want them high up in the sky to obstruct their view of the sky. Apex, for example. The signs in Apex are only like, you know, they're down in the ground. They're not up in the air. Mailbox, possibly. If that local zoning board puts a restriction on mailboxes, then yeah. Remember, zoning is local in nature. There's no across the board, this is how zoning works. So if a certain area wants to put a restriction on mailbox for aesthetic purposes, they can do that. So aesthetic zoning, keeping things looking pretty. Spot zoning, one or more properties is being rezoned for different use from a neighboring property. An example of this might be a playground on a street, a playground in a neighborhood, a public playground. So sometimes you have neighborhood playgrounds. They're there through spot zoning. Spot zonings, in order to be considered legal, they're only legal if they're in the public's best interest. They can't be for the individual owner. So if you put this park up, you can't say only the residents on this street can play on this playground. If you put a park up for spot zoning, anybody can come play on this playground. It's legal if it's truly in the public's best interest. If it just benefits the property owner, then it's an illegal spot zoning. How do you get permission to use property illegally? You request a variance. So again, lots of zoning terms. We started what, way back on page 112 and carried the whole way through to 115. So just having a basic understanding, if you see a test question, you're going to have a scenario and it's going to ask you which zoning term does this apply? Variance, spot zoning, non-conforming use, or historic zoning. So having a basic understanding what all these zoning terms mean. Questions on these zoning terms? Okay. So here's our first broker responsibility. The first broker responsibility we're going to talk about is our responsibility with zoning. And zoning is one thing that we have a duty to disclose. Brokers working in urban areas, for these purposes, we're just referring to downtown. Downtown zoning tends to be more complicated than outside of town zoning. The further out you go, the more, the less restrictive it tends to be. But either way, wherever the home is located, we have that duty to verify the zoning and understand the zoning laws. Remember what we said at the beginning of this unit, we're the experts of our market. And part of being experts of that market is understanding how zoning works and what the zoning restrictions are and where. Anytime you list a property, you will disclose the zoning. You will always need to verify the zoning before you list the property. How do you verify it? Your broker in charge is going to help you with that when you affiliate with a firm. That's part of your training. Once you get your license, you'll have a checklist of everything you need to look up, everything you need to do, where you need to go, how you find it before you list that property. Buyers and tenants, in general, we should be able to rely on the listing information. So when the listing agent discloses the zoning, buyer's agents should be able to rely on it unless you have a flag go up or if your buyer has a specific need. For example, remember the scenario we gave earlier. If you have a buyer that wants to buy a home and looks at you and says, when I buy this home, I want to convert my garage into a hair salon. I, as their buyer's agent, now have a duty to verify that zoning will allow them to use that property in that way. I have a duty to verify that they can live there, residential, and that it's zoned commercial to allow them to convert that garage into a hair salon. Again, we're going to talk more about our duties and responsibilities working with sellers and buyers. When I'm working with buyers, though, I operate by a pretty simple philosophy. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If my buyer says, I'm buying a property for this use, that use now becomes important to me. Making sure that the property that they purchase meets their end use, that's part of why they hire me. Again, we'll talk more about buyer's agents and listing agents' responsibilities. So if your buyer has a specific need, if they want the property for a specific thing, I would help them check, not just necessarily rely on the listing information. So let's see an example. An owner lists a vacant building previously used as a computer repair shop with a broker. Prospective buyer asked the broker if the manufacturing company could operate in the building. Without investigating, did you just have a little flag go up? Without investigating, the broker says, sure, no problem. The buyer makes the offer, the seller accepts, and we're under contract. Luckily for the buyer, prior to closing, it was discovered that the zoning was commercial zoning class. It excluded manufacturing use. When in doubt, find out. Don't just assume that your buyer can use his property for the use. Once they tell you specifically, this is why I'm buying this property, I now have a duty. I owe that to my buyer to help them verify that that property can be used. Don't answer questions that you don't know the answer to. Guys, please trust me when I say, I don't know, let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable answer, as long as you get back to them. If you have no intentions of getting back to them, then just say, I don't know, and stop talking. But if you say, that's a good question, let me get back to you on that, help them discover that, help them learn. When in doubt, find out. So what if the buyer went on to closing? What if they bought this home based on your word, based on you saying, yeah, sure, not a problem. They buy this house or property and find out after closing they can't use it for the intention of what they purchased it for. What happens now? Well, that buyer could sue you. That buyer could file a lawsuit and sue you. They could file a claim at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, in which case you could face disciplinary action on your license. Is it worth just shooting from the hip and answering the question? No. When we get into units 7 and 8, we're going to talk more about disciplinary action, the things that the Real Estate Commission can do to your license. So we'll talk about that. Any questions on our responsibility with disclosing zoning, with helping our clients find out, with verifying the information? So many times I think we just talk. Do you guys ever see this? People just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Be so very careful what you say. Sometimes the less you say, the best. And unless you know for sure, stop talking. Don't talk till you know. Can we always trust the internet? Again, once you affiliate with your firm, they'll help you learn where you can find that information. The best sources, the best places. I'll let your broker in charge, I'll let your firms work that with you. Okay. So in dealing with zoning, we don't have to refer them to an attorney, not unless you can find that information on your own, right? Maybe not even attorney for zoning. Maybe we go down to the zoning board, right? Maybe I help them get to the zoning board to get them that information. And if the zoning board doesn't know, then maybe we have to get an attorney involved. But yeah, if there's any questions about zoning or anything. what firm am I affiliated with? I'm a small mom and pop firm. We're called Blue Door Group. They've never heard of us before. Maybe you have. Okay. Yeah, we just saw our numbers from last year. We're not too small. We did all right. We're getting off topic. Everybody has a preference. What do you want? Big firm, large firm? Everybody has your own preference. We'll talk about affiliating firms, how you can find a firm. We'll talk all about that in Unit 7. Zoning. Questions on zoning. Still talking about our public land use controls, still about public land use controls. Public land use controls regulate the creation of subdivisions. Public land use controls regulate the creation of subdivisions, which means a developer just can't throw up a subdivision without first going through the zoning board. They have to get permission from the zoning board to create their subdivision. So this definition is on page 116. Don't hurt your hand. Word for word on page 116 under subdivision regulations, second paragraph down. The basic definition of a subdivision is all divisions of a tract of parcel of land into 2 or more lots, building sites or other divisions for the purpose of sale or building development, and includes all division of land involving the dedication of new streets or change in existing streets. The subdivision may impose restrictive covenants. The subdivision may impose private land use controls, which if we don't get to today, we'll see next week. Does everybody understand? The creation of the subdivision is a public land use control. And before a developer can get permission to create a subdivision, the zoning committee has to ask, does this fit into our master plan? Does this fit into our city or county's master plan? They got to get permission to build the subdivision. There are some exemptions. Just spend just a few minutes on this. Again, page 116. Dividing the land. If each parcel has 10 or more acres and there's no street right away, you wouldn't have to get, it wouldn't qualify as a subdivision. So what we're doing, exemptions to what's termed as a subdivision. And division of land no more than 2 acres into no more than 3 lots with no street right of ways. Those wouldn't fall under the category of subdivision. That's what you still got to go to the zoning board, right? You can't do much with land without permission from the zoning board. Street right of way, do you have the right to drive on it? Do you have the right to, who has the right to drive? We're going to talk more about streets in just a minute. How do you access the public roads? So as we said, the developer wants to create a subdivision, and before they do anything, they go to the zoning board. They request permission, and whether or not they're going to get permission, a big factor of that depends on, does it comply with the master plan? Subdivisions are required to have a plat map. The final plat map has to be recorded before the first unit is closed. We can go under contract with preliminary, but you can't have your first closing until the final plat map is approved by the city, by the zoning board, and then recorded. If you go under contract with preliminary and they change it, there should be an out. The buyer should have an out. What if they don't like the changes? Guys, bottom line, buyers have a right to know what they're buying. And if you keep changing that plat map, you keep selling units and letting people close on it and move into it, and you keep changing and changing. Now you got how many people live in there, and you change the plat map one more time. Whoa, 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 that's not what I bought. So that final plat map, it's got to be finalized and recorded before the first transfer of title, and that subdivision can happen. Sometimes subdivisions are in phases. So they'll build like one phase at a time, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Different phases are going to have different plat maps. What happens if the developer says, I'm just going to do it anyway? Well, it's illegal to sell land prior to recording final plat maps. There are fines that the city could impose on the developer. They could stop them. They could shut them down. If they put an injunction on you, an injunction is a legal stop. The courts could order you to not build anymore, to not develop anymore. So as we said, you can go under contract with a preliminary, but you have to have it finalized and recorded before you transfer that first title, before the first unit is closed. There's an approval process for getting subdivisions approved. There's 3 big stages. Obviously, lots going on in each stage. Stage 1 is your preliminary. You're finding the land. You're making sure that it's suitable. You're drawing up preliminary plans, preliminary covenants, if applicable. You're getting approval from the zoning board. You're securing your financing. Can you purchase the land, subdivide it, and build on it? The second stage is your final planning stage. Now you're finalizing all these preliminary plans. And then stage 3 is when your construction crew can show up and you can actually start building. Again, you guys, before you and I see the construction crew, there's a lot that goes on before this ever starts. People just do not wake up one day and say, I'm going to build a subdivision. It takes time, lots and lots of time and planning and getting approvals and going through the proper channels. When you are planning a subdivision, part of what comes up are streets. And in North Carolina, we have subdivision street disclosure law. Streets in North Carolina are either private or public. Please understand, private or public has nothing to do with whether the fact you can drive down it or not. When we refer to public or private roads, we're really asking who's going to maintain the road. Streets that are public are maintained by the North Carolina Department of Transportation, also known as the DOT. DOT maintains public streets. Private streets are maintained by the homeowners that live on that street. Is it part of your HOA dues Do they do a special assessment when there's a pothole that needs to be fixed? That's all going to be spelled out in your bylaws and your covenants. Is everybody good with that? I think that is a problem topic. I'm not referring to whether or not you can drive your car down it. We're referring to who maintains it. DOT maintains public streets. Individual homeowners maintain the private streets. I laugh because it's true, right? There's a lot more public road than there is private road. I'm going to stand up for DOT for a minute. There's a lot more road for DOT to maintain than the individual homeowner. When a developer is creating a subdivision, they have to state to the zoning their intentions of how the streets are going to be. Are the streets going to be private, or are they going to have to be public? They all have to be dedicated to DOT. DOT knows when you have a street, maybe public or private. The developer chooses if these streets are going to be public or private. If the developer dedicates a street as public, don't assume that DOT is going to take on responsibility. Just because it's dedicated as public, don't assume DOT is going to take on responsibility. Once the last house in that phase is complete, during construction, let me back up for a second. During construction of that phase or that subdivision, DOT is checking in periodically to make sure that the developer is creating their streets according to their standards. DOT has certain standards on how you create streets, how you build streets, how you lay the pavement. And throughout the process, DOT is showing up and making sure that you're building those roads to their standards. DOT is not going to accept responsibility until that construction, until that development is complete, until the roads are finalized. Then and only then will DOT decide if they want to accept it. So if you don't build it to their standards, they're not going to accept it. They're saying, look, you want me to maintain this? You're going to build it to the way I need you to. Does that make sense? So if they're dedicated public, we're hoping, fingers crossed, that they'll accept it. But we won't have that final acceptance until DOT sees the final road and puts their final stamp of approval on it. Have you ever driven through a new subdivision and you're on a road, right? You're driving on concrete, but you look at the curb and you see a big gap in the curb. Where are my fingers? Can you see them? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You kind of see a big gap on the curb and you say, well, gee, they still got a layer of street they could put down. Probably what they're doing is waiting for the final construction of the home. The last thing they'll do is come and fill in that gap, put the final layer of pavement down. And that's what DOT is going to come accept. Dedication is merely an offer. Acceptance won't happen until we have final construction. This is coming up, and some of you might be living this right now. It was back in the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s. It was quick to say, if I was selling on this subdivision, because they were dedicated, oh yeah, these are public streets. Buyers were buying when the public streets were dedicated. But the last house was built, the final layer was put down. DOT showed up and said, you didn't build these streets according to our standards. We're not going to accept them. People still think that they have a public street. And now, 30, 40 years later, they're starting to get potholes. The street's starting to tear up. And they're calling DOT and they're saying, why are you not coming to fix my street? And DOT is saying, because we never accepted them. We can't guarantee acceptance until it's done. All we can say is that it's been dedicated. The hope is that it'll be accepted, but I cannot tell you for sure that that's what DOT is going to do. Is anybody experiencing that? Does anybody live in a neighborhood where you thought you bought a public street, but come to find out DOT isn't going to maintain it because it was never accepted? That's good. That's good. As brokers, again, we always have a duty to verify if it's a private or a public street, especially new subdivisions, of course. If it's a public street, has it been accepted yet? The street disclosure law in your book, we're on page 117 is what we're talking about. The law itself is actually 118 through 120. You guys see all that italicized stuff on 118, 119 at the very, very top of 120? There's the in practice. Question comes in, good question. If DOT doesn't accept it, who's responsible for it? The homeowners are responsible for it. There's only two people that will maintain a road, DOT or the homeowners. And that's what's happening. Again, potholes, streets are torn up, they're a mess. Homeowners are going, DOT, why are you not come fixing my street? DOT saying, not us. If you want that pothole filled, that's on you. It's a private street now. As homeowners responsible, where are we? No idea. Contract or a concrete company, contractor, be a good place to start. Question came in, why is that not made clear to homeowners? It is now. It necessarily wasn't back in the day in the 90s and 2000. That's why we have this discussion in pre-licensing now. We don't want future homeowners to have to deal with this. They're all over the state. If we get this snow this weekend, they may say, when is DOT going to come pave my road? But if DOT hasn't accepted it, they're not going to. How does a homeowner confirm that a street? That's where we have our covenants. That's where we have our bylaws. That information should be, it is now. Again, we learned, we made mistakes back in the 90s. Not we, other brokers. I don't fall in that category. Other brokers made mistakes back in the 90s, and we're learning from their mistakes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Miss Campbell, but talking about the private roads, so if DOT doesn't cover it, whether it's potholes or clearing it when the snow comes or whatever, wouldn't the HOA or homeowners have to get together and find a contractor to deal with that since DOT won't?
Pretty much. It's the homeowner's responsibility. Yep. So you want to run out there with your gravel and your wheelbarrow and fill that hole, or do you want to contact a contractor? DOT does not care how you do it. You with me? Because they're not involved. They're not responsible. 15-minute fix, yeah. Some roads are rougher than others, right? Today, a lot of times lenders, if it's on a private street, lenders will require a private street disclosure that buyers have to sign, acknowledging that they're on a private street. Again, we learned from our errors and we're hoping to correct it. So going forward, we don't have these same mistakes. Store parking lot, no, DOT is not touching store parking lots. Somebody owns that building. We're just referring to streets. DOT is only going to maintain streets. Okay. I think I'm just going to say one more. Yeah, I'm just going to say one more thing today. Just a quick slide, and then we're going to stop, but we don't go anywhere. We're going to talk about what next week looks like. We have something called the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. That's a mouthful. This applies to selling properties in a subdivision, any subdivision that has 25 or more lots, 25 or more lots. This Land Sales Full Disclosure Act applies. And it applies specifically when you're marketing, when you're advertising across state lines. This was originated, dang, I'm showing my age again. How many of you on this call, here we go, remember life before the internet? My goodness. Remember life before the internet? For those of you that don't, barely. Remember, the internet has changed things. Yes. Now any advertising is going across state lines. But life before the internet, if you wanted to advertise across state lines, you had to take it across state lines. And that's when this act came to be. If you're advertising across state lines, you have to provide whomever you're advertising to with the essential information about the property. Before they go under contract, they have to be provided with that information. Again, today it's really easy. You're looking at a home across state lines, you say that looks nice, you click on it and you can see all the information about the property. Pre-internet, it wasn't always that easy. There's an old story about the shady salesman that went up to like Michigan in the dead of winter, went knocking door to door, trying to sell land in Florida. So here we are, smack dab in the middle of winter. You got that shady salesman saying, oh goodness, you guys look cold up here. Why don't you buy land in Florida? It's nice and warm and sunny in Florida. And the family's freezing to death going, man, that sounds nice. I want to be warm. So they say, where do I sign? They buy a lot in Florida. Spring thaw comes around. They pack up the family car to drive to Florida to check out their brand new land, just to find like swamp land that you can't develop on. How do we protect that? How do we prevent that from happening? We have the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. Your North Carolina developers can sell, advertise, right? Marketing. I mean, I'm not talking about selling property. The property is located in North Carolina. But if you have a developer, we're advertising now, we're advertising all over the world, right? Your real estate license regulates transactions on properties that are located in the state of North Carolina, not where you're located, where the property is located. So if you have a development for sale and you want to advertise that development outside of the state of North Carolina, you have to provide the essential information. Again, it's easy. Put a link on a website, poof, they can get the information. Okay. So let's talk. I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop sharing so we can look each other in the eyeball and have a conversation about what's getting ready to happen next week. So when we come back together on Tuesday, we got a little bit more to say in Unit 6. We haven't gotten to private land use controls yet. So our restrictive covenants, HOAs, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about, finish up Unit 6 on Tuesday. After Unit 6, we do Unit 20. I now officially start getting out of order the textbook. So remember, you have your tentative schedule and Learn Test Pass that tells you what units we're going to cover next. So we're going to finish 6. We're going to do Unit 20. And then we get into Unit 7. Please listen to me. Hear me when I say this. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. We're getting ready to see lots and lots of red stars. 7 and 8 are our agency units. 7 and 8 is going to define agency. It defines our brokerage relationship with our clients and our customers. 9 and 10 are our contract units. Basic contract law, dealing with the offer to purchase and contract. We probably won't get through unit 7 next week. We're going to slow down just a bit because the information is starting to get thick.
Question.
7, 8, 9, and 10. I'll get you in just a second, William. We spent the first 2 weeks going through 6 units, right? We're going to spend about the next 2.5 weeks going through 4 units. I'm not slowing down. The information's just getting dense. I beg you guys, bless you. I beg you guys, review where we've been, but please, please, please look ahead at where we're going. Lots and lots and lots of red stars coming your way starting next week. It's of my opinion that 7, 8, 9, and 10 is why you guys thought you were getting into when you signed up for this class anyway. Agency and contracts, and that's where we're heading. Yes, William, sorry about that.
Thank you for whoever sent the 2 people that sent the YouTube link. What percent
What'd you
you would
get,
say of the test is going to be 7, 8, 9, 10 compared to the others, if I may ask?
It's funny you should ask me that, William, because I actually sat down one time and figured it up. Roughly 40% of your exam comes from units 7, 8, 9, and 10. Roughly. 7, 8, 9, and 10. We're going to talk a lot about that. I love it. I had a pre-licensing student tell me once that I had her waking up in the middle of the night going 7, 8, 9, and 10. I said, perfect. That's exactly where I need you to be. My girl passed, by the way. Okay, exactly where I need you to be. So you did get the YouTube channel. Somebody put it in for you. Is that what I heard? Thank you for doing that, whoever did that. No, she didn't. She's not the one that told me that, but I'm sure she was right there. All right. So I'm going to